let's make it less formal. It's too. Let's make it more family like.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming, both here in the flesh and joining us online. Before I introduce our precious guests, let me just say a few words of thanks, especially to Ivanka, Lukáš, and the ECES staff for organizing and helping me organize this event, and Ondřej for propagating this event. And I would like to dedicate this debate on the legacy of Henry Miller to Thomas Nesbitt, my Miller teacher, who taught here a wonderful course on Miller almost 20 years ago. And it was a really inspiring and life-changing seminar. Thomas tested on us his hypothesis. It was called Henry Miller's Religious Journey, which he later published in his wonderful book, Henry Miller and Religion. And had it not been for Thomas, we wouldn't, to say the least, we wouldn't have this debate here tonight. So Thomas is no longer at this side of the world, but I'm sure he's somewhere with us. So this event takes place in Prague. It commemorates 100 years from the moment when Henry Miller met June Mansfield, a taxi dancer, on Times Square. And basically this very moment started Miller's writing career. He decided to quit his job at Western Union and pursue his career as a writer. Prague itself is not a place that is totally irrelevant for Miller studies. Apart from the fact that Thomas taught here a course, Prague is the place where the very first translation of Henry Miller was published in foreign language. It is this book, Obratník raka, Tropic of Cancer, in translation of Guido Palička in 1938. With cover from Matisse. Miller was very, very fond of this book, and I would say Miller played very important role here. Also in 1960s, actually, the publication of Quiet Days in Clichy was one of the excuses for turning down a magazine that was here. Miller had massive influence here on authors like Bohumil Hrabal or authors like Vladimír Boudník. And we have here a wonderful translator of Henry Miller's Rosy Crucifixion and Igor Indruch. And altogether, I can say that really unbelievable amount of Miller's work has been translated into Czech. So we would love to hear more, maybe also from James, about Miller's connection to Prague, if we can trace something. Now let me just introduce our precious guests. Let me start with Katy Masuga, who is joining us from France. Katy is a writer and author of scholar and author of two Miller books. One of them is Henry Miller and How He Got That Way. It's the one which I have. And she, if you want to study like the wonderful approach, how to do study of influences or meetings with authors like D.H. Lawrence, Rambo, Dostoevsky, Whitman, Lewis Carroll. So this is the book. Next, I would like to introduce James Decker, who in the Miller studies also doesn't need introductions. James has written a book, Henry Miller and Narrative Form, which is a very, I would say, precious roadmap for people who study Miller, and he interprets what he calls spiral form. That Miller's writing is not chaotic, but it's actually a very organized, I would say maybe like oral way of very special modernist writing. But James also is the editor of Nexus, the Henry Miller International Journal, which is now has out its 14th volume, and it's a I would say central magazine for Miller studies. So thank you very much, James, for joining us. Then let me introduce David Vichnar. If he's, I don't see him there, but hopefully, if he lost connection, he will still be there. David is a Joy Scholar. We teach at the same program here. He also teaches at the English department here, and he teaches Henry Miller in his Prague courses on modernism, and he teaches especially Black Spring. The idea of organizing a meeting here came from this lucky encounter that so many of us here actually like or know or enjoy Henry Miller. Unfortunately, Hanka Lundiakova, a musician and accomplished writer and now also an artist, is not here for illness. But who has joined us here is Igor Indruch, a translator of Rosy Crucifixion from Valašské Meziříčí, who is the true brother who is joining us here in the flesh. And myself, I'm Ondřej Skovajsa. I translated Miller's essays, and I also, in my book, written in Czech, called Written Voice, I compare Walt Whitman and Henry Miller on the basis of oral formulaic theory. So that's, I would say, as far as the introductions go. I thought we could start this hybrid debate in discussing what were our first encounters with Miller's writing. And since I have Igor here, I thought, by the way, online, do you hear us well? Guys, can you hear us? Wonderful. So I thought I could start with Igor and ask him about what was his first encounter with Miller.
Actually, I knew the name Henry Miller many years before I actually have an opportunity to read anything, because it was still communist regime here, and I was an avid reader. I was interested in degeneration and so on, and it was not so easy to find anything from Henry Miller here, but I was hearing about him now then and there. And, also, there were some mentions in other literature works about Henry Miller, so I was very curious about this writer, what he is like. So, whenever the first publishing of Tropic of Cancer, it was in 1990, I think, it was in the yeah, it doesn't matter actually.
1991.
Maybe, yes, reflex edition, yes. So maybe it was 1999, so I immediately bought it and read it, and I said, okay, nice, good. And then by pure chance, and I became a translator. It was really pure chance because I actually never thought about becoming a translator. It was just that I wrote a book myself, and when I was going from publishing to publishing visit in one publishing house, we talked, and they offered me a job. So I started translating, and after this, publishing house went bankrupt because it was the publishing of the infamous Victor Kožený, who was infamous name from the coupon privatization. So I went to another publishing, it was Fotobia in Olomouc, and actually this publishing had a plan to publish everything from Henry Miller, and they choose me as a translator. But unfortunately, I only had the opportunity to try and translate the crucifixion because then there were some other problems, not important now. But I am happy that I actually translated those 3 books because it's trilogy, but every book is specific. And in every book, we have an opportunity to meet different Henry Miller. Success, as the name suggests, is about his beginning when he went away from his family and his child and started to lead a bohemian life in New York. And really, this book is full of sex, really, but not only. It's not the main theme, but the name is quite okay. The Plexus is more centered about his life in France, and it's quite. And we see different Miller. We can see that he is making progress in his thoughts, in his writing, and so on. And the final book, Nexus, is completely different. And there is more. Then we see Henry Miller as more mature man, more philosopher, more philosopher's attitude to life. So everyone can have a specific reason for reading Miller, and everybody might have a favorite book. For many, it's Tropic of Cancer, of course. But I think that this trilogy is quite like if you have to read 3 books from Henry Miller and nothing else, this is like an essence of Henry Miller, because you see him in different stages of life and different stages of a development of a writer as well.
And I remember you were telling me, Igor, that you basically translated 1 book per month.
Yes.
Which is quite fascinating. So, and you were saying that you were in the flow.
Yes. It's also the flow. You know what the principle of flow? No, so it's quite nice thing, and you can work very quickly. And but there's one danger for translating in flow, that you can make mistakes because you can overlook things. You might not focus on details. So unfortunately, there are some mistakes. I must admit there are some mistakes because there was wild ideas, and I might say that in this time, publishing houses didn't pay much attention to editors' work. So unfortunately, I must in these books there are some some mistakes as well.
Thank you very much, Igor. Now let me pass the word to Katy. What was your first encounter with Henry Miller's writing? If you can share with us.
I hope that, thank you. My connection might be a bit weird. It's a bit dodgy. There's like a humongous storm happening right now. Can you hear me okay? So I just want to start by saying thank you for this invitation and this great little gathering, because I've stepped away from Miller for some time lately, and it's wonderful to go back. Oh my God, what am I thinking? I've been looking through everything, and it feels so good. It's like, yes, it's so visceral and it's so relevant. It's just timeless. It's great. So I think that, well, let's see if I could just generalize. As an American, you tend to encounter Henry Miller outside of academics. At least, I don't know if it's still that way. I think it probably is. But at least when I was a kid, not a kid, but let's say I was in college, when I was in university, you're not reading Henry Miller in any course in America. Now a little bit, sure. So I went on my year abroad to Germany and made some friends with other expats, and I can still see the moment. I mean, I was friends with this kind of crazy sort of punk rock guy, with great taste in music and concert t-shirts and sunglasses and lots of German beer and candles and hanging out and stuff like that. And somehow, he would loan me these books and loaning me I guess Naked Lunch and Henry Miller and Bukowski and the Beats, and sort of that's kind of the basic way you get introduced to Henry Miller, is through that sort of beat generation, beat Godfather kind of thing. And that was when I was 19. And but the funny thing is, I don't know. Yeah, I remember reading it, and it just felt like this was a separate world from my track as I was pursuing at the time a degree in philosophy and then eventually in comparative literature. But so Miller came back to me in graduate school, where when you're preparing your exams, you basically have to read everything under the sun. You have to read the classics. And maybe because I was in comparative literature, you build those lists out yourself. You do 3 national literatures. And so I included Henry Miller on my list, and I just remember reading it again for Tropic of Cancer, right? Not everything at the time. Including that again on my list, going through the whole crazy doctoral exam process where you're doing all this reading, and then you come up with a topic. And the bottom line for me was simply that, you're supposed to choose something that's not been saturated by everybody else. Henry Miller being one of those things. But the point is that I chose Henry Miller for my dissertation because he made me laugh. And that's what my advisor always reminded me when times got tough. He's like, what you told me, why you chose Henry Miller is that he made you laugh. And so yeah, so those were the kind of, I mean, that's it, the story in a nutshell, that he came through a non-academic path, and then I brought him into my own academic path, which I still feel uneasy about that, because there's a slight, but here we all are, academic in some capacity, which, you know, what would Henry think of that, you know? He was, what did he say? Any man with a belly full of the classics is an enemy to the human race. But of course, he was, you know, probably more well-read than most academics anyway. So I'll leave it on that note and pass it back to you, Ondřej.
Thank you so much, Katy. Yes, I was very happy that he made me laugh now as well, as I also took a break from Miller and read him now. And my first experience with Miller was similar to my experience with Whitman. And it was basically that it was somehow too intensely alive. I just felt that it's just so strong and so wonderful. When I read Tropic of Cancer, or when I read Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, that I could never finish the page. Yeah, that it sounds like a cliche, but it was just really so wonderful. And I always felt like I have to go and tell somebody, or and I would keep it. So when Igor was speaking about it, that he could translate, that he could just, okay, maybe Rose Crucifixion is not as intense as Tropic of Cancer, no, but somehow the emotional intensity and this of Miller's first book, the Paris book, Tropic of Cancer, it really took me maybe half a year to finish it. And I had to really push myself, otherwise I felt that this is so wonderful. And of course the English was difficult and so on. Yes, thank you. Yeah, and we'll talk more about laughter, and I'm happy that Robbie has laughed here as well. Yeah, okay. James, please, what was your first encounter with Henry?
Sure. Actually, my first encounter with Miller was before I even knew Henry Miller. We were driving across country, and it must have been either the day Miller died or the day after. And it's a story came over the radio, and my father was impacted, you know, clearly, and I remember that scene, but then I promptly forgot it until I got to college, and I was a freshman, and I watched a movie called After Hours by Martin Scorsese, and there was a clip, and I'm gonna put a YouTube clip in the chat, where Griffin Dunn, he's the main character, he's reading Tropic of Capricorn, and then Rosanna Arquette strikes up a conversation with him, you know, and this beautiful Rosanna Arquette, and I was, you know, wow, what's this about? And then reads the passage, and I was like, I've got to get that. I've never read anything like that. I've never heard anything like that. And so I went to, you know, I think it was, you know, the local Pickwick or whatever, and bought the book over break, and I read it. And I was like blown away by the voice and the language particularly. And then I started looking around my father's books, and I'm like, oh, he's got quite a bit of Henry Miller, which I promptly stole, took back with me to college and read, probably when I was supposed to be reading something else. But I just, you know, sort of tried to blow through, and ended up actually writing my undergraduate thesis on Henry Miller, believe it or not, which was very much not a typical choice, as Katy said, in the US. It's like, you're writing on what? And, you know, throughout, and I don't know if Katy's experienced this as well, but it's always been, oh, the guy who wrote The Crucible? And I no, yeah. I either confuse him with Arthur Miller or Henry James. All the way.
But James, do you remember at the conference in London that Guy hosted, where Magnus, you know, Magnus, the director of the Henry
Dan Byrne.
The song, yeah, about Marilyn Monroe. I forget the lyrics, but
Yeah,
the
Marilyn
same
Monroe.
thing.
The lyrics are Marilyn Monroe should have married Henry Miller.
Yeah.
And he take her to Paris, and this is not against Arthur Miller. Yeah, Death of a Salesman is my favorite game. It's a great song. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
remember when.
they were also thinking that okay, he's a teenager. You will grow out of Henry Miller, but you ended being the Miller Scholar Publishing. So
I remember one time I was working on my dissertation, a librarian came up to me and accused me of stealing some Arthur Miller thing that had gone wrong. I said, no, wrong Miller. Sorry.
And so you were off the hook for the missing Arthur Miller material.
David, please, how did you encounter Henry Miller? When did you? How was yours?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I have to apologize for still being in transit here. My plan was to be home well before 6 p.m., but that's life, right? My first encounter, I'm just gonna add a little anecdote, since it seems we're starting with the funnies hour and anecdote hour. I remember at the age of 12 or 13, I was spending the summer holidays at actually I'm traveling to Slovakia, and it was my Slovak grandmother's library. She had a very respectable collection of all kinds of essays, and as a 12-year-old boy, I was very much into Jules Verne, and I was reading all the travel stories and the adventure tales and whatnot. And I remember staring at the cover of these two books in Slovak called The Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, very much intrigued by the sort of travel geography potential that lay in those titles. And I remember asking grandmother, could I borrow those from the library and read them? And I remember my grandmother's concerned, if not panicked face, and explaining that no, these are not travel logs exactly, and they're not about exploring the heart of Africa. These are not exactly books for a 12-year-old boy. So from the get-go, Miller had this sort of forbidden fruit aura about him, and and I guess later in life, as so many other things, I saw Henry and June. I have to admit, I went about the pop cultural path. And also via Joyce, of course, and the 1930s Paris expat scene, and the Obelisk Press, sort of, there's a publication or publisher connection between Joyce publishing excerpts from work in progress with Jack Kahane, and Jack Kahane being the prominent Miller publisher and publicist. So I got interested in the Miller circle, alternative to the Stein and Company. That's my initiation story.
Thank you so much, David. Yes. So maybe we should move on. And so our actually one thing, as you mentioned, Tropic of Cancer in Slovak. I forgot to say in the beginning that we have actually in Czech 3 translations of Tropic of Cancer in Czech, and 4th is in Slovak. So such a small country, Czechoslovakia does not exist anymore. And there is one specific thing about the Slovak translation that the translator messed up. Igor, and but because we talked about Igor about translators' errors, and that instead of I am the happiest man alive, So he translates it role play that I am the unhappiest man alive, which is very sad. You know, right in the first page there is a mistake, and otherwise it's a beautiful book, and that you start doubting the quality of translation. Yeah, so wonderful initiation story. So I thought in the we should ask, like, what shall we, in what way is Miller inspiring, and in what way because obviously we should think what Miller, what shall we take, and what from Miller's work, and also from his legacy as a person, as a human being, and what should we throw away to the hyenas? The metaphor of the hyena is of course Miller's. What should maybe let's make another round, or we can maybe also yell like throw the things here at the table here. But what do you find inspiring, or in what way is Miller really should be read today? And Katy has mentioned laughter, that Miller makes you laugh and somehow makes you alive in some respect. But Igor, what would you say? What would be? Why should we read him?
I consider Miller as a part of the wider movement. And the movement is for the freedom of art. Because there is a kind of paradox in history that we also, now, today, we consider art as something, an expression of freedom, free will, right? But people of power very quickly realize the power of art. So through the whole history, art was used by ideologies, by people of power, for instance, church, of course, or communism, or so on. And free art was actually suppressed, not only politically, but also we know the formalism in art, in all kinds of art, not only literature, but paintings, music. And artists always struggled against political use of art, against formalism, you know. So there was, for example, example of Impressionism and other paintings like Kolov, for instance. And also, I consider Miller as a part of this movement in literature, and quite important person who actually succeeded after many struggles, because we know that his publishing was banned in many countries. I think in some countries Miller's work were banned as in 60s, I think. In Ireland, I think. Am I right? You don't know. I don't know. So that's my point of view.
Art as complete like freedom of expression, and in Miller inspiring. Would you add to this, James?
Sure, and I think, you know, not just freedom of art, but I think freedom to be different, freedom to be different from the norm, and that's something, you know, that's really becoming an issue in the United States at this particular moment. There's a new wave of book banning, particularly in the schools. At the moment K through 12, but they're talking about it, you know, in college as well. What kind of curriculum can you have? What kind of majors you can have? And I think Miller really much at the core is about that in fierce individualism, right? Opposed to systems of all stripes, and the the freedom to pursue your own potential, right? What he called the potential being. I think that's a very important aspect of him. I alluded to earlier his language and his voice, and Katy's written a lot about this too. But it's just such a sense of urgency. He's got to get it out on the page. He sometimes can't get it out. He wants to. It's so explosive and so just word drunk, for lack of a better vocabulary choice. But that is something I think that I find crucial about Miller.
Thank you so much, James. Definitely, like and this is like the moment, like the courage giver, like in a sense that Whitman, as Ginsberg dubs Whitman, the courage teacher. That this is something that young artists, and not only artists, are struggling heavily today, and more, and to break freedom and to be able to pursue their own path in life, creative path. It's a pity Hannah isn't here, because she would say a lot about this as well. But I also like this idea of the artist that makes that fecundates the cultural soil, and the hope of some the inspiration for some rebirth and making changes in one's life after reading a novel. No, that novel is not like a pastime, but as an exposure to really deep and overwhelming reality. Katy,
yeah. So yes, definitely. And of course, there's no question he had privileges that let him do this, and that's fine. Like, he has the freedom to pursue the freedom in art, but like he said, oh damn, what the heck is this from? Anyway, where he says, through art, then one finally establishes contact with reality. That is the great discovery. And there was another passage I saw earlier, and I was taking all these notes, but that's the only one I have right now on that subject. But yeah, so beyond just that, like the exploration and the privilege to be able to explore that art. Yeah, I'm super interested in how he speaks about those subjects through the medium of writing, that he so felt like, it was in his nature. He had to explore this, but he's so transgressive. It's so unbelievably subversive. And I don't mean the subject matter, I'm not talking about writing about sex, just the fact that he's writing about writing and writing about how does language work? How do we use words to have meaning, and how we destroy meaning by using words, that we're constantly slipping, moving past, like looking for more, trying to get down to some kind of essence that is so unreachable. And that pursuit itself is like the joy of life. It's the torture and the joy of life. There's a really great, and of course he uses things like women's bodies and sexuality and things like that as metaphors to kind of pursue this. Like the things, what's that line in Nexus where he says you could examine a little toenail and break your head over it trying to figure it out. And one of the things I always tell my students is that what Miller did that was so extraordinary is that he's trying to like shove life into a book. Like, can I get this in there? How can I really take the experience and get it in writing, which he knows he cannot do, but he's gonna die trying. He's gonna die and laugh trying. That's the great pursuit.
Thank you. David, would you add to this? What is why should we read Henry Miller? What is inspiring, precious about his writing?
Sure, in as much as I can add anything to what has been said already, which I doubt, and half of which I didn't hear anyway, because I was just in transit from the car to someplace vaguely private and appropriate for this. Well, Miller to me is an interesting example of a writer, I guess, for chiefly two reasons. Yes, he's an anti-dogma kind of writer, an artist, and a thinker, which of course means he creates an alternative dogma, or his anti-stance becomes a stance, as it were, and of course subsequent culture, co-opts, just as with the historical avant-garde, the anti-position or the anti-dogmatism becomes a dogmatism in itself, right? Or always runs a danger of flipping into an alternative religion or a heresy, which then becomes, more pious than the Pope and stuff. And so of course in our 21st century era, Miller is an interestingly, of course, a liberating presence, or a voice, who helped to create the 60s, 70s sort of spirit of rebellion, and via his influence on the beatniks and whatnot. Even though, of course, in the name of this iconoclasm, he of course also succumbed to, and is now being accused of, various types of sexism and dogmatism and stereotypification, and all these kinds of isms that our politically correct, whether positively or negatively connoted culture pictures him as. And number two, he's an interesting modernist who retains this kind of American transcendentalist, if you will, skepsis toward technological innovation, toward the modes in which modernity leads to spiritual stultification, how it fetishizes, how it compartmentalizes, how it institutionalizes, right? There's this, unlike many of his avant-garde, especially in Paris, avant-garde, followers or contemporaries, right? Miller retains this type of on the one hand, embrace of the modern age and progress and secularization and sexual liberation and all these wonderful things that the 20th century brings, but retains this nostalgia for all the way back to Emerson, and this very American notion of the self and nature and a skepsis of civilization. So in that I think he stands rather not unique, but he's definitely on the in a minority, if you will.
So yeah, so definitely Miller is a great critique of modernity, of the alienation. We talked about it before with Igor, how with Miller comes how is the good food comes into literature, as think Shapiro says it in the essay, and that there is in him this very strong emphasis on beauty. And this is, for example, in his text on Brasai, that Brasai has like a natural, like normal vision. His appreciation for like I don't know, for keeping now we are so much discussing the emptying of the public sphere, you know, and in neoliberalism, and that basically I think Miller is this great supporter that there should be like public space needs to be kept, and he has this beautiful essays now about how Paris maintains these chairs there, and they are paid by the Parisian, and how he appreciates this. I have to ask here because as we maybe I can ask James here, because not only, of course, we should address the negative side of Miller as well, and so we can get past it. But there is recent criticism by Indrek Manis, for example, who actually named his book Henry Miller, the Inhuman Artist. And I have to say, I had really lots of issues with this title, that not only is like Miller attacked, and often for very good reasons from the feminists, of course, but why when we look at his work and look at his essays and look at his topics, and it is very important to keep in mind to like read the books in the right order. That basically Tropic of Cancer is this first book, and that and then he later returns back to Tropic of Capricorn, and I mean Black Spring, and then Tropic of Capricorn, and then he writes this Rosy Crucifixion that Igor has translated. And there he talks about his earlier self, and it's the Miller emphasizing the dark side of himself before he found his voice, and talking about his situation of alienation in New York, in I would say even like hip hop critique of capitalism, that he becomes this, he shows this Hobbesian world where everybody eats, you know, where when you read Tropic of Capricorn, it's this world of just mere survival, and he mercilessly shows himself participating on this. So for me, Miller is this the critique of alienation that comes with capitalism, or in a broader sense, modernity, and how he criticizes continental breakfast, how he criticizes the cultural sterility, and so on, which is a modern trope as well. So, and I have real trouble with this dubbing Miller Inhuman Artist, because I think in many respects he basically criticizes the dehumanizing aspects of modern civilization, New York and in America. And yeah, so I know Indrek Manis is not here, so I cannot really ask him. But maybe would you defend Indrek or James in what sense? I just would like to ask you about this. If you are happy with this label or so, I just, or if you could comment upon it, James, please.
I think he's, you know, the title's coming from a passage from Tropic of Cancer, and I was seeing if I can pull this up. I've got it somewhere. But in which he essentially is arguing against those isms, those systems. Let me see if I can find this. Yeah, he says, I am proud to say that I am inhuman, that I belong not to men and governments, that I have nothing to do with creeds and principles. I have nothing to do with the creaking machinery of humanity. I belong to the earth. He continues, and then he says, I am inhuman. I say it with a mad, hallucinated grin, and I will keep on saying it, though it rains crocodiles. And I think that's where Indrik was headed with this. I'm not a philosopher, and so in terms of that, and there are other people working on that aspect of Miller right now, writing dissertations on his philosophy of inhumanism and so forth. But I think it's an ironic use of inhuman. I think in some ways, using that phrase inhuman makes Miller more human. It's very, very much paradoxical, right? That he doesn't believe in systems. He doesn't believe in doing things because they've been done or because other people do them. Very, very, I think, somewhat existentialist adjacent in that regard. He creates his own meaning. That meaning is personal to him, and whether that meaning offends others, he could care less. I think maybe Katy might be able to articulate it better than I can, but.
Well, yeah, to be honest, it has been a while since I've looked at Indrik's book. I did read it back. I think it's been out for 10 years now. But I agree with James. But to critique or to summarize or to defend Indrik, I couldn't do that. But of course, it's like Whitman. I mean, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. So Miller's I think he expresses that with as much vigor and pride as Whitman does, and to call himself inhuman when in fact he partakes of all of the systems that he claims to reject, as you do. I mean, this is kind of like the epitome of libertarianism. It's like he has he reaps all the rewards, and he can of course critique and disown anything he wants. It's like Peckover, who falls down the elevator shaft and dies in Tropic of Cancer some short time after he's gotten false teeth. And it's like, oh, what a waste of his false teeth. He's died, he's had this senseless death. And then Miller gets to take his job as the editor. And Miller knows that he's doing this kind of cheeky, insulting, kind of this, he positions himself as a jerk. Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, of course, but I think like that Miller's message is essentially like humanistic, that there is the tiger in him and that there is the lamb in him, and the humanist.
Yeah, but he's more of an anarchist, is the thing. He's not a humanist. Yeah.
Humanistic, that he somehow tries to strive for elementary human values which are suppressed in the world of technology and alienation, and I think this is the essential message of him. There are wonderful passages against racism in Miller, for example. There are wonderful passages against destruction of the nature of countryside. Yeah. Wonderful passages of criticizing exploitation, and even in Tropic of Cancer, it's like so for me, like it seems quite unfair to Miller. First, like I think it's problematic to shift Miller into philosophy, because Miller is an artist and not a philosopher. And when you look at it from this point of view, you often then disregard the laughter aspect and the joyful aspect and that to me, like Igor, how do you read Miller? How do you,
I will follow I think that what we must think about is that the concept of humanity and inhumanity is also evolving, right? And I think that from some point of view, we can see Miller as inhuman, but we must be very careful about that. Because he was, as I said before, Miller was part of quite a movement. And one thing was that he was in conflict with society. That was evident, right? But his personal solution of this conflict that he turned not just to art, which was okay, but also to selfishness. At least in some part of his life, he actually acted very selfishly. So he was only interested in himself, and from this, I think that this is the part that is not quite well accepted by anybody. But I would like to point one, in my opinion, very important thing, that he was always a lover of life. I don't know whether you do know the works of Erich Fromm, the philosopher from Frankfurt School. And he has an interesting article about necrophiles and biophiles. And Erich Fromm used this metaphor to compare totalitarian regimes, which he considers as a regime, and led usually by necrophiles, and he used it not in sexual meaning, but the meaning that necrophiles, according to Erich Fromm, are people who like things that are not changing, that are not evolving. And that's the contrast to biophiles, to like change, who embrace something you cannot foresee, unforeseeable things, So necrophiles likes order and certainty, and biophiles like chaos and uncertainty. And from this point of view, Miller was definitely a biophile. He embraced life, he enjoyed life, but sometimes he did it selfishly. And that's, for instance, he abandoned his family, his wife, his child, and he never looked back. He never regretted it, at least not publicly. So this was his dark side, I think.
But I mean, Miller's hugely selfish. I think everything about him is selfish. His entire, the obvious elephant in the room with Miller, of course, is misogyny and the representation of females, and that he uses this trope, that he exploits this entire universe for his ends, which are simply this, what we've been talking about so far, like just his need to try and figure things out that can never be figured out. And sex becomes the greatest analogy for that. He said in an audio interview, sex is such an elemental force that is as mysterious and as magical to me as talking about God and the universe. I mean, this is fantastic. This is great. But at the same time, this is very selfish, the methods, the means that he uses to explore this. I mean, there's no question. But it's funny because so many things, like he says in Sexes, when man begins to permit himself full expression, when he can express himself without fear of ridicule, ostracism, or persecution, the first thing he will do will be to pour out his love. And there's so many lines like that too, when man sort of lets go of his fear or himself, his selfishness, when he recognizes, as you're saying, Ondřej, his humanity and connection and all this, he'll pour out his love, all his love, it's all acceptance and one and this kind of thing. But really the entire his oeuvre is an exploration of this desire from his own selfish angle, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I would add his use of caricature. You know, there is one character in all of Miller's work, and that is Miller. Everybody else is a caricature, whether for good or whether for bad, whether it's a saint or whether it's a monster. And I think that's how, you know, he might position that inhumanity versus the humanity, right? He's not for the group, he's for himself, developing himself. And I think the way we get to a more humanist viewpoint is by saying, if everybody did that, right? If everybody realized their own potential, their own meaning, that we would live in what Katy called it anarchy, maybe a peaceful anarchy, right? We'd all be sort of doing our own thing, you know, which talk about transcendentalists goes right back to Emerson, right? And his idea of self-reliance, which Melville hated and Melville thought would, you know, lead to this kind of purely selfish life. But I think Miller might have approached it in a more optimistic way, that if we can, you know, be true to ourselves, even if that might offend people or hurt other people, well, you know, then we've achieved, at least for ourselves, that full potential.
Yeah, I think this message of courage to lead one's own life and is very crucial. I would also mention his beautiful text. He writes about fellow authors, fellow writers, and his basically warmness that comes from the war. Especially Tropic of Cancer for me, but in his essays. And James, can I ask you a personal question? How do you, as an academic, as a professor, how do you get by being at the same time a Miller scholar? Do you sometimes, is it a problem, or do they read you alone, or like is it?
I teach at a place that doesn't care about scholarship, so I can do whatever I want under the radar. It would be different if I were at a different place, that, you know, an R1 university. So I don't have to face that in a professional way. You know, but some of the things that Katy brought up, you know, the images of women, images of Jews, of minorities, and so forth, all of these things, I'm, you know, not going to defend those on their face, and so that can be problematic, right? But I think, you know, Miller himself changes over time. I think he was mortally humiliated and embarrassed by some of the things that he said about Jews following the revelations of World War II, to the fact that he doesn't republish, you know, À la Retour New York, for example, even though that would have been an easy one him to republish. He sort of pushes it aside and, you know, tries to pretend it doesn't happen. And, you know, no matter what he says against Hitler and so forth and so on, he has leaned into some of these stereotypes, leaned into some of the very phrases that the eugenicists were saying in the early 20th century. You know, and that can be a very uncomfortable
at the same time, in cancer, he has this passage again mocking eugenics. Oh, like very strong there.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, that goes back to but what Katy's, you know, with the Whitman quote, he's very much contradictory. If you're looking for a single system in Miller, he mocks the use of phrenology, for example. you know, the use of cranial size to determine intelligence, and he mocks it roundly. And yet, when you read some of what he says, it's right in line. And I think, you know, some of that is I see this especially among, not to sound like the old man, get off my lawn, but you know, I see this especially among younger readers who expect writers to have the same cultural values as we do in 2023, right? Which I think is an inherent impossibility. Even if you go and you find a feminist hero writer, she is very likely to have views on race, views on transgender, so forth, that conflict with our current values. And I think that's how we need to read Miller, that sort of casual anti-Semitism, if you will, versus the Hitler type, right? This is where he grew up. Was he worse than others at the same time, you know? And I think some would say, yes, he is worse in some ways.
And he wants to be worse in some ways, even. Sorry, and not to hijack that, but just to add to it, and I'm sorry, David, you can join in on this too. This deliberate gesture of kind of trying to present what life really was on the streets. You know, when he says, what's that line? There's only one thing which interests me vitally now, and that is the recording of all of that which is omitted in books, right? He's writing the last book. And the effort is indeed to include everything, the high and the low, and I don't want to say that as an excuse, but he's pulling out all the stops. We know that. And he's doing this deliberately, and he's what's the word? He's like flaying himself, like he knows he's putting himself on a pike by doing this. But that is really the point. And doesn't make that language excusable, but at least it gives us, it's almost like, what does he say? I can't think of the first part of the passage, but it's make sure if you're gonna dirty the mud puddle, make sure it reflects the galactic varnish. So there's that. He's showing us ourselves. You know, we're all guilty. We're all human.
Thank you, Katy. Maybe David, you can contextualize, because Miller's that he's not politically correct, and so this is not only him, of course. So this is something that we encounter in modernism as a whole. Even if you read Virginia Woolf, or when you read Eliot, or when you read Joyce. So David, what's your take on Miller and on basically the values that have shifted for a good reason, and that's great they have shifted, and in what way is it can you find parallels in other modernist writers?
Right, where does one start? Well, I guess referring back to what has been said about Miller's self-obsession, and how he's sort of putting himself on the sort of surgery table all the time, and whatnot. There is that. This is another respect in which he is the almost a cliched modernist, right, or a paradigmatic modernist, in that he there's this constant conflation of the individual and the universal, right, and through the self, an embrace of a totality. Another way of also putting this, of course, is to think Miller's you know, auto fiction or faction, or however you want to dub this bizarre new genre he's creating. Ultimate realism, right? Because for Miller to write about himself is to write about the only thing really knowable. Hence, all the other characters, like James was saying, right? All the other characters reduced to caricatures. Well, it might have to do with of course Miller's egotism or self-obsession, but it might also be a statement, almost an ontological kind of element to his writing, that he only ever writes about himself because that is the only subject he knows well enough to write, or not even knows enough. He can at least explore and say something meaningful or revelatory about it. Which of course ties him in tandem with all the great egoists of modernism, right? No coincidence that was the title of Eliot's magazine once upon a time. It ties him with Joyce, of course, for whom again you have this sort of individual particular universal, right? He speaks of the particular universal. He mentions, for example, in that famous conversation with Arthur Power, how he always writes about Dublin, because if he can get into the heart of Dublin, he can get into the heart of every city in the world, right? And basically Dublin is the city I know best, and so I write about it. We could rephrase that as, apply it to Miller. I write about myself because that's the self I know best. And if I get to the heart of myself, then as we've already also mentioned, others can follow me. And if everyone does that to themselves, then humanity would be in a better position, or in a better place, more empathetic, more conscious, more cognizant of itself, right? You can apply Freudianism to this, right? That the ego should be as widely, as widely spread and widely stretching and whatnot. So yeah, this notion of the particular universal in the Joyce says that, and Miller says that. I mean, everywhere, right? In the particular is contained the universal. In the individual is contained something about our shared humanity, if you want to call it that. So in that, of course, he's very much a modernist, a product of his time.
I thought maybe we should now return back to the laughter in Miller. If we tie it in with modernity, Bergson has this great book on laughter, which maybe fits Miller very well. That basically you laugh when somebody is behaving in a mechanical way. When somebody slips and falls down because he just wasn't patient enough and behaved like a machine. And in this sense, Miller's laughter is there. So we laugh at Van Norden, who behaves like a sex machine, and who is completely and many other characters, Boris, who basically does nothing but just reads and writes, and so on and so on and so on. So, but let's talk more about. I was really happy that I laughed again when I read Henry Miller. So maybe what are your favorite? Did you laugh, Igor, when you were translating? Do you laugh when you read Miller, and when you can just read some funny passages from Miller? How does he achieve it?
I don't think I actually laughed. But yes, but there is a lot of humor in Miller's works. Actually, Miller reminds me from Czech writers of Jaroslav Hašek. Of course, Jaroslav Hašek is more humor. Jaroslav Hašek, it's not comparable, and Hašek has different style than Miller, but I think that they have also a lot of common. For example, that conflict of society I spoke before about.
Yes.
And but fortunately for Miller was able to solve it quite favorably for him. Jaroslav Hašek was not really for him. It was the solution for Jaroslav Hašek was self-destruction, as we know. But the common aspect is this the description of some characters. You know, the funny description of characters. You can see that in Miller as well as Jaroslav Hašek. They both have this the talent of observation of other people and their typical behavior and typical character traits, and both have this talent of write about it in some kind of maybe even sarcastic style.
And I would add, maybe it's also like the trickster character, you know, that like somehow overcoming the life in the streets, and for Miller especially, and the oral aspect of this, of course, is the link between Hašek, perhaps the most famous Czech author, and his Good Soldier Švejk, but the idea of the anecdote and so on. But the trickster character, you can see it in, for example, Roma literature. Character about Lajos who is selling shit to the non-Roma, and in this sense he survives, that he tricks the others. So and Miller also was like, you can see it also in the structure of his works, that when he says even a bad novel requires a chair to sit in, and this is how his life penetrates into the book, of course, and the structure of the book. But for him, much of it was survival, and it's not just a joke, that we talked about it with Igor, how we made this list of friends and who is he going to feed on that day and the next day and so on. But it's just tactics of survival and how he tricks the others. And I think really makes sense with this traditional or character of oral stories, the trickster, and it's that he was not the strong one, always. Maybe he was the big author at the end of his life in LA when he was swimming in the swimming pool with this huge mushroom over his head and having the models visiting him. I actually thought of inviting Brenda Venus or letting her know. I asked, but I decided I will leave it without dear Brenda. But Katy, laughter. What else have you in
I know, I compiled all these passages. I was looking for the funny ones, and I think I'll see if I can share some with you, because obviously I can't, or I'll paste them in the chat. But I mean, yeah, just great stuff. And of course, the stuff that makes you think twice. So for example, in Tropic of Cancer, I really love the line, hopefully y'all remember this because I don't have the context. You would have thought from the way he looked at me that I had just really bizarre, not surrealist, but just kind of like flat out absurdisms. Wait, I just had another one. Let me see. Oh, one of my favorite texts is the Hamlet correspondence. And I love this line where he says, "What I believe in with my whole heart is moderation. For others, as for myself, I go the whole hog." I mean, just so many wonderful, hilarious points. Okay, here, okay. I also really love this one. So this is a Van Norden passage, and this isn't necessarily humor, but it's one of those ones that gives you the second take where you really have to work hard to understand this. all that mystery about sex, and then you discover that it's nothing, just a blank. Wouldn't it be funny if you found a harmonica inside or a calendar?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that renders me a bit speechless, or else I have to like go on a lecture for like 2 hours on that one. I love it, love it, love it. There's a lot to say, but I would rather pass it on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so Katie, you need to leave sooner. Is that right? You need to leave at 7:30.
Yeah, indeed, it's true.
So,
But I can try to come back. I just have to,
yeah.
like David, I have to get in the car and make a journey, and then I will try and connect.
So we'll either be here, we can wait for you at 8 and for like some closing words. Yeah, and then we'll probably head to the flesh and bone.
Okay.
But we'll be here at 8 and maybe a few minutes after 8 as well, Katie. So
Okay, I'm gonna try to switch to my phone.
try to switch on as well.
Yeah.
Also, laughter is something you write about it, Katie. Like laughter is something physical. No, laughter that
Yeah.
it's for Miller's great fight is just with the Cartesian dissociated mind. No, and he brings back the body and the sensuality and so on. So laughter. He also talks a lot about laughter in the. And he says that it's some way of making you. He always makes a point. You remember it. It's also a mnemopoetic, some device, no, like a trick, you know. That then you remember this, like 15 friends, or for example, like that you should live somewhere where when you are looking for a job, for example, when his friends come. And they talk about Soviet Russia, how it's great, and he basically asks, well, I was asking whether I could be there a proofreader, for example, yeah. Like these very parts of Miller being Miller's eye or supraself, yeah, being the proofreader. It's the most hilarious passages, no, like, at least like. For me, James and David, do you still have something to say about laughter? No laugh, no. Yeah, we have said enough. Now, please, James, have you found out about Miller's connection to Prague? There is the text about Machati we discussed before with its beautiful romanticization of Czechs. Miller says, isn't it wonderful that Machati is a Czech and Czechs still know?
Maybe you can broader, wider context, because
Yes.
Henry Miller was a great admirer of the movie by Czech director Machati, Extase, and he even wrote quite a big piece of text about it, and he was really fascinated by this movie. He appreciated it a lot, but the funny thing is that according to this movie, he made a whole theory about the Czech as a nation. And of course, it was very romantic. Like when we, for instance, when we read Karel May and his ideas of the taking people of
So Miller did visit Prague in 1928 on his big trip through Europe. It was the first time he had been to Europe, and even earlier than that, in a variety of different places. He includes Prague among places he wants to see. So when he's talking in Sexus, for example, he talks about, or actually Nexus rather. He includes Prague on places he wants to be, but in 28 he actually does go. He interestingly says later that this is one of the very few times in his life he doesn't document it. He says almost a year of it, as I say, but no diary, notes, no notebook, no sketches, no nothing, as I might say. Who was I and where was I heading? And so it's a great loss for us to figure out what he thought about Europe that first time. He does say that he preferred the first time Budapest to Paris. He mentions in a list of this trip of sort of memories that he's rehashing later, much later, synagogue in Prague. So I have no idea, in 1928, how many synagogues were there, which one he might have visited. But there's a line in Sextus where he says the Iron Harp of Prague, and then right after that he says a sunken street near the synagogue. Now for me that doesn't mean anything, but I don't know if for you if that is a clue or
There's the whole Jewish town is historically the most flood-prone area of Prague, so technically almost all of the streets in the Jewish town are considered something in that sense. But there are at least two, possibly Pinkas specifically, where the ground is noticeably lower than the street above because of the changes that were made in the early 19th century. So that is.
Where does he mention it, James? Can you say it? Where does he say it?
This is in Sextus where he says that.
Yeah, very good.
And there's another line in Max where he's describing Max, and he says he's like one of those sad, virtuous, abstract-looking wraiths who flit through the ghettos of Prague and Budapest. So Prague clearly made an impression on him, as he's using it later in later works. But as he pointed out, he didn't keep any notes, and so it's one of those sort of lost periods to the biographers and so forth. And obviously he would have been a nobody in 1928. So even the people in Prague, would have just seen him as an American tourist.
Thank you very much, James.
Maybe he was so absorbed by Prague nightlife that he had no time to write about it.
And actually, it somehow fits into the general category of quite ambivalent, I would say even dark reflections of Prague. So when we read Apollinaire and his zone, so Apollinaire talks quite ambiguously and quite darkly about Prague, and so does Albert Camus. Like in so he's like lots of writers. I felt like Camus and Apollinaire are the two I can think of. So their descriptions of Prague were ambivalent or dark. Anyways, now maybe we can open the floor to the public. I can show you our dear guests here. So yeah, the room. And guys, so if you have any questions, you have the rare chance to speak to Jake Becker and David, and Katy will join us at 8, and Igor, of course. There's something that is that you always wanted to know about Henry Miller and wherever. In Vietnam.
I was wondering, I had a question, but I know it's a difficult question. I know that art is part of life, but would you say that for Miller, life is primary or art is primary? Which is primary? Does he experiment with life to have material for his work, like some writers do, probably? Or is just art part of his life, and what he is a lover of life, basically, and just writing is part of that? Do you think he has this goal in his mind, that of writing, as he says in the Tropic of Cancer, to write the big book, the book of this century, or final book?
I think this is a central question in Miller, definitely, and
I think that he just felt a very, very strong urge to write, and this is not it is quite common thing for artists. They just must do it. There is no choice. You are full of something, and you must express it in some way, either by writing or by painting, or by writing music or so on. So that actually, in Sextus, he writes about it, about how he is going, for instance, to street, but he actually doesn't pay much attention to the surroundings because he is already writing a book in his head. It's actually his own words and writing. Before he started to write on paper, he was writing books in his head, right?
yes, but I think this is a very central question, and I think it really varies, because when you look at Tropic of Cancer, so there is the project of the big book, that will be published anonymously, and no books will be ever written after that. But that's this project he's working on with Boris, this one of the most mocked characters in Tropic of Cancer. But this changes, and when Igor refers to this, to the Rosy Crucifixion, I would say it's a later work where, of course, his position of writer is much more solidified, and you can also see it in the bigness, and it of course comes also with the maybe some lowness of the author Henry Miller. But I think one has to really keep in mind, and this is what he draws on, I think also D.H. Lawrence and so on, that Lawrence always says that how he enjoys writing, and Miller thematizes it so much, the joy of writing, that's one thing, that he's living when writing, like physically, that there is not like a separation, and there is some that's one thing. Also, similarly to Whitman, when Tropic of Cancer is born, it's a thing when he collects his diary pieces together. So there is more something like meshing, sampling method. In my criticism, I compare it to the situation of the oral bard, when he performs the thing, that when you talk about oral formulaic theory, basically that the same epic, South Yugoslavian epic is never performed twice the same way. So in this sense, and that the song is not composed for but during performance, that he really stresses this present. Also, when you read Miller's Tropic of Cancer, what is very special about it, it's really written in this present tense, this immediate presence, and throughout his authorial mythology, these two selves somewhat merge at the end. And for him, for Miller, as a human being, it was very important for him to make it and to publish this book, to finish it. And he knows that his life will take completely different spin, And he also talks a lot about the idea of death and dying, and how somehow life is translated into these dead black letters, And then comes the reader, and he again reads them. So there is this whole. He develops it very much. I think in Whitman's footsteps as well. The idea of that there is the book that should be lived, and it was Whitman was the only book he brought with him to Paris, So of course there is lots of also modern theory about it, Bart. So, but it's a difficult and central question for Miller. But definitely, I would say that Miller, and I look forward to James, and thank you so much, Ondra, for this question. It's really complex and it varies, but definitely I think Miller is the one, and this is how he actually defines himself against Proust and against Joyce. Yeah, he says that Proust talks about the world which is already dead, and he talks about Joyce that he talks about that he only is dissecting a corpse. Yeah? But for Miller, he draws on these Christian notions of logos that, like, through him comes the idea of, like, you know, of the inspiration, and that through him it flows, you know, and how at the end he connects himself with the Seine river. So I would say that like life is primary, and writing in early Miller, definitely in early Miller, books are writing and are a way to enhance life. And later on, he also talks how, as an artist, he lives in such a luxurious atmosphere, that to be an artist, that you can turn everything into, and that basically being that your life becomes secondary to your work, but at the same time you still live you have, and for him, and now I finish. It's the idea that his life finally gets some direction. Yeah. And he was really working on this, and he's obsessed with this. He keeps on returning back and back and back to it, how he became a writer. So thank you so much, James and David. Work or art or life for Miller?
So I think it depends on where he is in his career, as you mentioned. I think early on he had this intensity and this urge to merge life and art. More and more as he got older, he talked about the possibility of not writing anymore and not reading anymore, and just living, and that his life would become the artwork in essence. Now, he didn't actually do that. He wrote a lot, even after he stopped writing, you know, what we would call the auto novels, and focus more on essays or more to the point letters. But constantly he had this ideal in mind that he would not have to put pen to paper, he would not have to type, that he would become almost enlightened enough in his life that he would become a work of art.
Right. That might have been an ambition of his, right? But one that he almost seems constitutionally incapable of realizing. And I like, you know, it's kind of funny to be having this conversation with someone like James, whose Henry Miller, A Narrative Form was such an eye opener and such a portal of discovery for me, vis-a-vis Miller. I mean, I like the concept of a spiral form that you elaborate there, James. And I think you also somewhere make that point that the obsessiveness with which Miller keeps repeating himself and his anecdotes and how he plays variations, but he keeps circling and spiraling around himself and a couple of central concerns of his life, that has something almost self-therapeutic about it, and how he does feel like he's writing his life in order to not just make sense of it, but I mean, to write his way out of it, and to heal might be a big word, but he does feel like an analysand who keeps repeating, reshaping, key images, and there is this process of gradual self-clarification, like becoming the enlightened almost. So there's, you know, the duality of living and writing really seems, you know, two sides of the coin for Miller. There's no writing without his life, but there's no real living without writing. And the writing comes to inhabit life, becomes life, becomes its aim, fulfillment, you know, completion, what have you. But yeah, it can't be thought one without the other. They become a dialectics.
One thing we could probably add, and which is important, that his life stylization spins around this self-imaging as taking the Christ story. It's no wonder that it's called rosy crucifixion, and this is Thomas Nesbitt's actually argument. And also that Tropic of Cancer ends, my course is fixed. Yeah. And of course, this is something very provocative. No, that he takes on that his memories basically, or his self, the voyage of his own self-discovery, and the way he what he makes out of his life takes this skeleton of basically of suffering, and then somehow leaving the cross and becoming the resurrection. Yes. And which is a very, yes, it's quite crucial. And I would just like to add that this book, I remember some people don't like this, that it's like too. I remember one reviewer of my book said that this is like too, that is svatokrat, this is sacrilegious or so on. But it's Miller, it's Miller, but I would say that he is democratic in the sense that he was. Whitman is, by the way, Whitman was doing it way before him, using the same very similar images, like offering. And that basically Miller asks you to do the same. No, he says also in the interviews, like, no, like we are not just folks, but our aim in life is not be good neighbors, but our way is somehow to find to put one's life in harmony with the universe. Definitely, like Miller, when you look at him as an old man, so he seems like that he managed, no, that he didn't end up as like peevish. That his strategy worked. No, he was not a sad and unhappy and grumpy old man. No, like you can.
So didn't follow the path of self-destruction like other authors, like I think I mentioned that.
Yeah, exactly.
Very other artists.
He didn't kill his wife, you know.
He didn't kill himself.
Didn't like Burroughs. He didn't kill himself.
Didn't drunk himself to death. Or
No, but we have to ask like these questions whether it's a viable path or not. No, like.
He actually made it.
He made it. Maybe still some questions. Well, we have talked quite a while. I just thought we could say official goodbye to Katy. So, is there some there is also in Miller this moment of suffering oneself towards the very end. No? this is a trope we find in Tropic of Cancer, also in his study of Rambo, of at the very end, when there is complete like desperation, there comes the new line. Me personally, if I was to write about Miller again, I would maybe more emphasize his critique of capitalism. Which, yeah, by the way, I have something for you. There is, if we talk about politics and Henry Miller, so there are two things and these are two Peters. So the second big translation of Tropic of Cancer, published in 1991, is prefaced by Petr Hayek, and basically draws on very heavily from Karl Shapiro's preface. And Petr Hayek is a demagogue, basically now a current big Czech demagogue and friend of Václav Klaus and friend of Putin. So this is one reception of Miller, and the second one is that the current Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala actually quoted Henry Miller in my translation, and it's actually Petr Fiala who dissed yesterday the protest of faculties of humanities for more respectable wage. And I was wondering whether, because it's a quote from a Miller essay where he says, I don't want to wear a brown shirt nor a red shirt. I want just to wear a shirt which I like. And that he says like, fuck off communists, fuck off fascists. And it's, but I think it's very dangerous when Miller's individualism is adopted by a politician and used to vindicate basically the society, the state of society, where society does not exist. Like to use Miller to back up Thatcherism and her famous quote, there is no society, only individuals, is something that Henry Miller, I think, wouldn't like. But I just thought that this is quite funny, especially given the context. Maybe Miller served to back up, and the thing that Miller emphasizes later on in his writings, and that is that you have to suffer you cannot expect anything from society, and that he's tired of this whining other artists and so on. So now during like austerity measures and so on, which we are experiencing here as well, I just found this as an interesting paradox. So next time I would like to more emphasize the Miller as the anti-capitalist writer. He's been read here as the anti-communist as well.
There is a passage where he said he would be willing to eat less so that everybody else might be able to eat a little more. He says that in Plexus. So early on, he was very intrigued by soapbox orators who were for the IWW, socialists and so forth. Hubert Harrison, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. He read multiple books by Eugene V. Debs. So his core was very much socialist. Now he rejects systems later, but it's difficult to get away from that kind of influence, and you see that permeating through. You already mentioned the scene, with Van Norden and that condemnation of capitalism that we see there, sex and capitalism sort of intertwined. And then in Tropic of Capricorn, he's very, very vicious against that kind of mindless materialism. So I think I think any very fascist demagogue who is using Miller is very, very much willfully misinterpreting Miller.
Oh, Katy, that's great. So No, it's not Katy. Katy is from Prague. Igor, so what do you, yeah, oh, Katy is back. So, Katy, we have had just a wonderful conversation and about Miller's laughter and his abuse by politicians, and then about the relationship between art and life in his work. So if Katy is back, maybe you can have just last, if you were interested to say just something about life and art in his work, or just, and then we can just have all closing comments, and we'll go to pub and you can continue and have a nice bottle of wine by us.
I want to go to the pub.
So here was the central question by my colleague Ondřej about Miller and his relationship between life and art. What is more, what prevails, and how we somehow said that it's a dialectical thing, and that was writing somehow enhances life for him, that the two are not divorced, that he's not the suffering writer who feels that he writes and he cannot go out and collect mushrooms or so. Instead, you know, that he that in Miller these two things combine. Like your last thoughts about it, and does writing and life for Miller, or basically in general, maybe you can just say the last thing that people should, which we should take out from this debate on Miller.
Can I?
Yes.
Add something? I just feel that we didn't finish this, the key, maybe your key question, why read Miller today? And I felt like we didn't finish when you all had that round. You told us what you find essential with Miller, what is interesting, you know, his fight for freedom of art, his kind of, you know, anarchy, whatever, exploration. Is that really relevant today? Maybe that could be a question. So maybe just, we'd like to hear why read Miller today.
Yeah.
Simple enough.
Okay, let's take this. Thank you so much, Ondřej.
May I?
Yes, please, Igor.
Okay, so that's from my point of view, is that fight for the freedom, art and life, because that's the eternal struggle. It never ends. You can see every day. Every day is never granted. Nobody granted to you. Some people talk about freedom, and they are actually taking it from you. So the individual attitude is always essential, and that's the way you don't need to agree with everything Miller writes or the way he lived. You can even despise it, because he did despicable things in his life, you know, but there is still an inspiration. And also his development is very interesting for me.
For me, it's the courage to pursue, to leave the career, the business career that he was leading, and to live your life according to what was given to you, and basically to live according to the God's image in you, and not to sell your souls at the market price. So that's I think what is.
That's nice. My phone is gonna, I'm on a phone and it's gonna die soon. And I'm also in the toilet. So which seems like a wonderful place to end a debate on Henry Miller, in the toilet here at a public community center. So I'll go next if that's okay. I think Miller is so relevant and very timeless. If I can say that, it might be naive in 100 years, I don't know. But for now, he's so very relevant because, of course, he asks us to explore that in ourselves. And I love the way that he places himself as kind of an everyman. And I think David was speaking to that, the universal, the particular, and the universal. So he represents the average Joe who is able to connect. I think he connects himself very intimately and very well with all of the great thinkers, and brings that into the everyday, makes it very accessible. And in the modern day now, we do have quite a disconnect, I think, the way that technology is advancing and the way we're getting information and fake information and artificial intelligence and of all these kind of frightening explorations of what's to come. It is quite essential to be able to come back to being an ordinary person and connecting with ourselves as great thinkers, you might say, that the exploration within ourselves can still occur, and that we can connect on that level. And also I just want to reiterate something I said earlier, where he says, there's a line where he says, I wanted to be in life and write about it at the same time. So there's something about that life and art and living it, like really living the beauty and the curiosity that you feel in yourself, in the world, and pushing it to the limits, always pushing it to the limits. So with that, I might get disconnected, so I'll just say thank you.
Thank you so much, Katy. David, yes?
I mean, as far as lessons to be taken away, I'm just gonna say Miller is a great example of how, in a slogan, I think he anticipated, like few others, the personal is always political. And I guess I'll leave it at that. And you know, in an instance of objective chance that was so dear to surrealists and to Miller. I mean, when Ondra was inviting me to this debate, I told him I'm not a Miller specialist by any stretch, and that I teach Black Spring as an example of a text that interests me as part of experimental fiction seminar. So Ondra asked me to speak about Joyce and who seems to be more in my area of competence. And so, of course, in Black Spring you have this passage about the wonderful recesses in the toilet. To them I owe my knowledge of Boccaccio, Rabelais, Petronius. All my good reading was done in the toilet, at the worst Ulysses, or a detective story, right? There are passages in Ulysses which can be read only in the toilet if one wants to extract the full flavor of their content. And this is not to denigrate the talent of the author. So, you know, here's to the wonderful recesses of the toilet and to all the wisdom to be found there. That's the Joycean passage in Black Spring, and I could talk about it endlessly, but what's the point, right?
Next time.
James, please. Why should we read Henry Miller today?
So I think I you know, thinking about my students' reaction to Miller, and they don't really read him as a museum piece. And I think part of that is that authentic voice that really comes through. He's really trying to work on his identity, and I think that really speaks to contemporary students, whether they go in a very different route, and no doubt most will, than Miller. That act, I think it was maybe David brought up the idea of catharsis, that through writing and through self-analysis we can start to live our potential. And then a second is that he's very suspicious of those sort of all-encompassing systems. In the United States right now, we're, I guess when aren't we? We're in a very polarized political situation, and people dogmatically cling to one side or the other, and I think part of Miller's appeal these days is his ability to break through that polarization, to say, yeah, a pox on both your houses, as it were, even though in sort of the grand scheme, he's on the side of life, he's on the side of freedom, and very much against some of these euphemistic appropriations of this is about parents' rights, so you can't read these books. That's what's going on right now in Florida and Texas and other places. So he's very much open debate, right? He doesn't want to close debate. He wants to listen to what you have to say. He might reject it, but he also wants you to listen to what he has to say. And so I think that is very, very meaningful even today.
So thank you so much. We forget to say that like Miller is very old. Yeah, like Miller was born in 1891. Yeah, and that his voice is still so present. So thank you so much. Thank you, really. It's been wonderful. Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you to our dear public. And have a nice rest of the day.
Have a drink on us.
Yes, thank you for
Let's do it
inviting me
again. Thank you, Ondřej. Nice.
Thank you, Ondra.
to see you all.
very much.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Katy, Jay.
Yeah, you too. Let's
Keep
do
in
it
touch.
again.
All right.
Have a nice
do
weekend.
it.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Have a good one.
We can make up for being more online than offline, but we can make up for it now. Please accept our invitation. We'll go to Týnská literární kavárna, to the saloon there.
You say invitation, sounds like we are paying.
Yeah, it's true. We are not paying. Yeah, we are not paying. But it's true. Thank you.
We are not that rich.
We are, yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much.